Today, we're going to cover China. Of our countries, this is the fourth country we've done, and we'll start with the Constitution and type of government.
Wait.
Bridget Reed, please call the main office. Bridget Reed, please call extension 5106. Thank you.
This happens every day.
Okay, China has its current constitution as the 1982 Constitution. This is the fourth one since the Revolution of 1949. And so, but this has the latest and the greatest, and this is some of the features of this is the one that they did away with the chairman, and now they have the general secretary. They also put limitations on terms in that they have 2 5-year terms, and you're not chairman for life like Mao was. So now we have 2 5-year term limits. The correct name for the country is the People's Republic of China. Why do they call it a republic?
It's a good question. Because all the
Thank
people,
you. Yeah.
It's because all the people, it's never mind, I don't actually know. This doesn't make sense.
Unitary.
Yeah.
Because it's a unitary government, really.
It's propaganda.
They believe in the concept of democratic centralism. What does that mean?
Yeah, a few people represent the interests of
All
everyone.
right, so a few people are representing the interests of everyone, and as such, they qualify it as a democracy or a republic because they're representing everybody in the fact that they are doing, this kind of went black.
You might have to do something about that.
Bridget Reed, please call the main office. Bridget Reed, please call the main
That's good.
office.
That's exactly what we do. We select our representatives.
Yeah, but they don't actually vote on the representatives. That represent
Oh.
The
everybody.
people don't vote, they just say that we have the best interests of people at heart, so we are a centralized democracy. We are representing their interests by the fact that
How do they determine that? Who has the best interest?
whatever they say.
Josh Ricks, would you please come to Chris Richards' office? Josh Ricks, the main office, please.
It's hard to argue with them. Also a feature of the government is parallel hierarchies. We've got hierarchies for the party corresponding with those of the government. Parallel hierarchies has everybody under the control of 2 groups, the party and the government, and we call that part dual subordination. So everybody's got 2 bosses. Okay, and the glue that holds this all together, the enforcement mechanism of their Constitution is the People's Liberation Army. They're the ones who keep this whole system of parallel hierarchies all together and working as it's supposed to. Okay, over in legitimacy. A couple of things that make them legitimate. No more than a couple. 4. First, we have the mandate of heaven. Who can explain what that is?
It's like a cycle where a certain family will get to the top, and as long as they follow moral principles that are generally accepted in
Okay.
China.
And as long as they are in power and are good, goodness equals power, then they then are having the mandate of heaven.
Something's weird today. It's not like this usually.
Is it taking a picture when it goes black?
No.
Do you need power? You need to plug it in?
Yeah, it's still recording when it goes black,
Oh,
so
it doesn't?
yeah.
Okay.
Usually
So we're good?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm good if it's good. Okay. The second thing that gives them legitimacy is Maoism and their revolutionary experiences. So they go to the revolution of Mao. this idea of the mass line, that goodness comes from the masses, that the mass line will lead the revolution, as opposed to the vanguard of the party with who? Lenin. Very good. So, mass line, that's ultimate goodness. That gives it legitimacy. Also, economic growth. In China, the economy has been very good. And so as a result, that gives legitimacy to the rulers. And the last one is nationalism. They will appeal to nationalism and this idea of China first, China's the best, all that will help to make legitimacy. Okay, let's go to the historic past here. We go back to the Empire period, and this is where they get their Confucian ideas. Strength comes through conformity. Power comes from goodness. That we need to know our role in society, that's one of our goals, is to learn father-son, mother-daughter, parent-child, all these kind of relationships. And that age equals wisdom. The older you are, the more wisdom.
Josh Ricks, would you please come to the main office? Josh Ricks to the main office.
Okay, then we have the period of Western imperialism. And Western imperialism brought to, and the Opium War, the Boxer Rebellion, all of these things bring nationalism to the Chinese, and this will then eventually result in the 1911 revolution. The 1911 revolution takes, and we have the downfall of the empire, the downfall of the emperor, and this is led by the nationalists. Who is the head nationalist?
Chiang Kai-shek.
He's the second, but Sun Yat-sen is first, and Chiang Kai-shek will take his place when Sun dies. Okay? Now, the nationalists take over, but there is civil war. And this civil war is between the nationalists and who? The communists. And the communists are led by Mao. So, we will fight a civil war. Who will win? The nationalists. And the communists are sent on the Long March.
Oh.
And they're sent out to go into oblivion, and so they escape, and so the nationalists win, they establish the government, and this, however, is brought to an end by the Japanese, who invade. And the Japanese invade, and World War II comes. After World War II, this civil war comes up again, and this time, the communists will win. So in 1949, the nationalists flee the mainland and go over to Taiwan. Okay, and so the mainland now is communist. They establish the People's Republic of China. The United States will adopt a two-China policy. And with President Nixon, he will recognize China communist, which we never did, and we have a two-China policy. We recognize nationalist China and communist China. And President Carter will reverse that and recognize communist China as the one true China. But we still do business with the other China. Okay, over to geographical division of powers. They have a unitary government. However, there are local units. provinces, and below that are the local cities. An example of local government in action is Donwee. Donwee are your local workplace. They control health care and other things on a local basis. This is the closest you can find to some sort of devolution or some sort of local control. But again, it's a unitary government, so that means that the national government can take power back anytime they want, which is the same as Great Britain. But Great Britain's having devolution too, but the national government can take power back anytime they want. Okay, let's go over to political culture. Some of the things that you would have is centralized authoritarian power. This came from Imperial China. They are incorporating some of the same things. The same bureaucratic hierarchy. So in Imperial China you had the emperor, then under the emperor you had the mandarins. These are your trained bureaucrats who were tested and everything that they had by merit to be in the government. Then you had the gentry underneath them, and then the people underneath them. Thank you.
Here.
That looked fine to me.
All right, very good.
Okay.
What did the gentry do?
Then we have, what?
What did the gentry do?
The gentry are the go-betweens between the mandarins, the people in the government, and the common people. These were your local mayors and people on the local level who helped implement the policy of the emperor.
Okay.
Okay? And then we move over to a communist, and we get the same kind of system that they would develop, and we'll look at that in just a minute. Okay, so that's part of their culture. A trained merit bureaucracy in running the government. Okay, we also have a very conservative society in China. China is conservative for a couple of reasons. First of all, they believed that they were the Middle Kingdom. They believed they had everything they needed. And so they didn't need to trade. They didn't need to reach out. They were the center of civilization. And as such, this whole idea of Middle Kingdom made them very, very reluctant to change. Also, geography does. As you see, they're the center of all those many countries. China is probably surrounded by more countries than most any other country. So those things make it conservative. Also, you have many people. Many people make them very adverse to adapt technology. You don't need technology if you've got 1 billion people to move dirt to build a dam. They can do it by just sheer will, sheer mass of people. So, very conservative in their society. Also Confucianism, and we already talked about Confucius ideas that they had. And so these are some of the things in their political culture that have been adapted by the communists so that they can fit in. Let's move over to executive branch. Okay, executive branch, you can just divide it in half in the middle. And on one side we have the government, and on the other side we have the Chinese Communist Party. So, on one side, on the government, we have the president. And who's the president? No, he was. But who is now?
Like Xi Jinping.
She.
That's
All right, she's the president. Who is a he? It's not who. Who was, but not now. As long as you got that straight. Now, parallel in the executive branch over on the other side for the Chinese Communist Party is who?
General Secretary.
I can't tell if you actually say it or.
All right, the General Secretary. And who's the general secretary? No, it's she, again, okay? So she is both the general secretary and the president. Okay? Now we have a dual executive. Who is the other executive in the government? Right, the premier or the prime minister. And who's the prime minister? All right, Lee. So we got Lee and she leading the country. Okay? Now, who else is part of the executive branch under the government? We've got, and you can put this under the prime minister, we've got the cabinet. So we've got all the cabinet departments. Okay? Now we go over to the Chinese Communist Party, and who corresponds with the cabinet and the prime minister? All right, the Politburo. And the elite of the Politburo are the standing committee of the Politburo. But the Politburo and its standing committee correspond with the cabinet. So that's your dual hierarchy in your executive branch there. Okay? The president and the prime minister both can have 2 5-year terms. So that's the max. 10 years and you're out. And that's the way it has been for the last 20 years. Okay, let's go over to the legislative branch. Okay, on one side we have the government, and you can just divide it in half. And the other side you have the Chinese Communist Party. So on the government side you have the People's Congress. Now the People's Congress are 5-year terms. So you're elected to 5-year term to be in the People's Congress. Then opposite that is the National People's Congress, and that's of the Communist Party. And they too are 5-year terms. And many of those people are in both. That's why they're parallel. Sometimes they're the same people. Now, the People's Congress has a group, they only meet just like once a year or so. They have the Standing Committee of the Congress that makes laws and decrees when the whole Congress is not there. And for the Chinese Communist Party, we have the same for them. When the National Party Congress is not meeting, then we have the Central Committee making the rules. So there you have your parallel hierarchies. On one side, the People's Congress, other side, the National Party Congress. On one side, the Standing Committee of the Congress, and on the Communist Party side, the Central Committee. Okay, so you got the parallel hierarchies, both making laws. But do they really make laws? All right, they are rubber stamps of other things made by the executive branch. So they basically rubber stamp what's already been approved by the executive branch. Okay, turn the page to the judicial branch. Now, under the judicial branch, they have a people's court system, and it's set up similar to the geography. So you have the National People's Court, the Provincial People's Court, and then the Local People's Court. So you have that 3-level system with the courts just like you do the others. They go by code law. And one thing you remember is that punishment is swift and harsh. 99% of all the cases come to trial, and most all people are guilty. They have the highest percentage of executions of any of the countries that we're looking at. Powers and changes over the last few years in the court system. Recent decades have revitalized their system. They've had new judges and juries because of the economic freedom that people have had. They have to have trials to protect economic property, so patents, copyrights, and all these things that come with law codes. We have to have rule of law issues because you can't have a vibrant economy in a capitalist system without property rights. And these have to be protected by courts, or else you're not going to have this kind of a system. So we've had new law codes for that. However, there's no judicial review. I mean, there is no court that's going to declare an act of the Politburo unconstitutional. So that is the issue.
When it says fads of the 50s include all the following, it says 3D, is that just like 3D movies, or is it like wearing them around like kids do now?
Wearing 3D glasses,
Like, just for the movies, or is this talking about like for fashion?
whatever. It can be for whatever,
Okay.
but that's meant for the movies.
Yeah.
But if you have 3D glasses, then that answer is correct. Okay? All right.
This is like a fun.
Let's look at, well, they have few civil liberties, so they are about the last when we use the freedom scale index. I mean, they treat their people, they have fewer civil liberties than probably any of the countries we're looking at. Okay, let's go to bureaucracy. We have, again, parallel hierarchies. We have the bureaucracy on the government side, and then on the Chinese Communist Party side, we have the secretariat. And on both sides, the people who work in the bureaucracy are known as the cadres. These are the full-time party workers who work in the bureaucracy of either the party or the government. And they are these are the people in the bureaucracy, and the people underneath are the activists. And then at the very bottom are the people. So this is the system that they have today that corresponds with the old imperial system, with the people in the bureaucracy who are called what in the imperial system? Mandarins. And today they're called the cadres in the communist system. We have the people who are the gentry, the intermediaries. Today they're the activists. And then the people at the bottom. Okay? They have a patron-client system in their bureaucracy, which is called the Guanxi. So the Guanxi is their patron-client system. And to get this, you have to show your loyalty to the party. You show your loyalty to the party, you make the list of elite people, and then you can be in the government or the party. All right, let's go to the parties. In China, they have a one-party monopoly headed by the General Secretary. Under the General Secretary, we have the Standing Committee and the Politburo. And the people who implement the Politburo's policies are the Secretariat. That's the bureaucracy of the party. Under the Politburo is who? That's the Central Committee. So remember, we go Central Committee, Politburo, Standing Committee of the Politburo, and then General Secretary at the top. Okay? Now, when we talk about parties, we have a term called Feng Shao. Who can remember what that was? Thomas?
So, the party will increase its dominance until the people revolt, and then they'll back off for a little bit, and then, when the people are like okay with that, then they'll go back and be more and more.
Very good. And what causes that, Thomas?
I don't know.
What's happening in the party?
Factionalism.
Very good. Factionalism. Different parts of the party, the moderates or the reformers or the conservatives, they get a majority on their side. And so as a result, their policy is implemented as they factionalize and gain a coalition for that faction or that idea. So that's what happens, this Feng Shao, loosening up, tightening up, as whoever has the most control in the Politburo at the time. And that's how Chinese politics works. Okay, let's go to interest groups. Interest groups, we have mass organizations. And these mass organizations would be like the All China Federation Trade Union. So they have a trade union organization. Or they have the All Women's Organizations. But all of these interest groups or these mass organizations are called transmission belts. And what are we talking about when we say a transmission belt?
They don't really have a say, they just kind of carry out what the party and the government want.
Okay. Well, what does the transmission belt do with your car or your transmission?
I don't know.
Okay.
I have a Flintstone car.
We're not the experts on the car. Your transmission belt transfers the power from your engine and takes it to the wheels. And so you're taking the power of the Chinese Communist Party and you're transmitting it to the people through this interest group. And so you're kind of indoctrinating them and getting them into the system by doing that. And so that is why they have interest groups, to further the work and the things that the party's doing, getting people involved, making them feel important. So that's why they have interest groups and allow them. And of course, as I mentioned before, we have the Don Wei, who is a local group. These are your urban social units based on workplace that handle some of these local things. So, if you ask the question, do they have interest groups in China? Yes. But they are all there to further the work of the party. Okay, next, elections. Elections are held to legitimize the Chinese Communist Party. The party controls. The Chinese Communist Party is the only one allowed on the ballot. But that gives legitimacy because the people say, well, we voted for them. But there was only one choice. The only direct elections are held on the local level. So they vote on the local level, they send them to the higher levels, and they are then elected by the other people until we get to the top. Okay, let's go to the media. The media is strictly controlled. The only ones allowed are Chinese Communist Party approved. The big issue right now is the internet, how to control the internet. And this has got people like Google and other companies in trouble because they agree to some of the Chinese controls, but yet they're here in America. And so anyway, there is an issue with this. And it's very hard to control the internet completely. And so all these issues have been coming out with the media. Okay, social cleavages. Okay, there are a number of cleavages in China. The first is the north-south cleavage. between the Chinese in the north and the Chinese in the south. What is the most obvious cleavage in this area?
North versus south.
Is it rural versus cities? Right?
Well, that's another one. But the north versus south is language. They speak different languages or different versions of Chinese. You have the Mandarin versus the Cantonese. And the only way they can understand each other is to write it down because they have the same written form. But if a northern Chinese person would speak to a southern, they'd have a hard time understanding what they were saying. So they write it down, they can understand. Okay, we also have, as Thomas said, the rural-urban. Rural-urban. Urban has more material wealth, they're better off. Rural people are more of the poor. So we have rural people moving to the cities for a better lifestyle. And so this causes issues between urban, who have, and the rural, who are the have-nots. We also have different cultures, cleavages between the cultures and ethnic groups. And this is included, the big one is Tibet, because the Chinese are mostly Han Chinese, but you have all these different ethnic groups, like the Tibetans, you have the Mongolians, and other people who protest. You also have some religious issues. Religious issues are with the Falun Gong, who are a religious group, but there's not many in China that go by, and there's a little reading in your book that talks about Confucianism. They believe in some of the standards, but most of China are non-religious and would not be attending church or anything like that. Okay, next page. Let's go to participation. Only about 7% of the total of China is a member of the party. So only 7% are members of the Chinese Communist Party. To get people into the party, they have a youth league. This is a great recruiting agent. They also recruit people through the People's Liberation Army. So you can rise to a position in the army and become a leader in China through the military thing. Some of the civil unrest and protests, of course, we have the Tiananmen massacre and protest of 1989. We have the Falun Gong, this religious protests. These are all types of participation. And we also have the Tibetan, mostly the monks, they're protesting. And we also have this group called the Charter 08. That's another protest group protesting all these things that the communists are doing. But if you have to have a specific example, and sometimes they will exclude the Tiananmen massacre, so you need to find other examples since then to substitute. Tibet's a great one, the Falun Gong's another one, Charter 08's another one. All these can suffice. However, the way they participate the most is through this Guanxi. That's the patron-client system. You get into the system to participate by your connections. Socialization agents, to get them into the system, family's still number one, but close with that is the Chinese Communist Party. They join the party, join the youth league, and that gets you socialized. Okay, let's go to civil society. Civil society is low. But they've had some recent growth as party control has been loosened a bit with economic liberalization. You have people going to internet cafes, coffee houses, and different places, and a lot of the youth do things like that. Also, you have social issues groups forming in China, environmental groups, have wanted to protect the people from these huge dams that they're building. And so you've had protests of people who say these big dams and people have been moved, forcibly moved. All these are part of this protest system. We've had people who protested the one-child policy. They had this earthquake and people only had one child and their only child is killed. And so China has granted exemptions to those things. Non-governmental organizations are allowed, and they have non-governmental or NGOs on religion. They have things, everything from ping pong to environmental things. People are involved and do civil society things. Okay, let's go to gender issues. Traditional gender relations in China, in those, women are subservient. Back in imperial times, women had their feet bound. Women were second-class citizens. One of the things Mao did to try to gain legitimacy is give more rights to women. So the Communist Party has championed many reforms for women, which give them more legitimacy. In China, women are more likely to work outside the home in many capitalists than in many capitalist countries. So women are doing many things, but they still are behind men in many of the things that they can do. And definitely behind men in the number of leadership positions. Most of your leadership positions of the Communist Party are all male dominated. All right, let's go to political elite and recruitment. There are two recruiting agents. That's the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army. If you're going to get ahead in China, you've got to be a member of the Communist Party. The nomenclatura, that's just a list of elite people. If you make that, that is how they recruit leaders. And then, as I said before, they recruit leaders through this Guanxi personal contact patron-client system, which started with the Long March. The Long March was the very genesis of this system that's developed now into the 5th generation of Chinese since the Long March in the 1920s. One of the things that has been an issue with this is that the Guanxi plus the economic boom has led to corruption. And they've tried to root corruption out of this elite, political elite system. But it's important today to study the Guanxi and not the office that people hold, because it's what their connections in the Guanxi is that shows their power. Somebody can be retired as the military affairs director, but if they are the Guanxi person in charge, they will still have the power, even though they don't have the position. And one other thing in the recruitment is that the old imperial system of testing everybody to get ahead, that's been put on trial by Mao, who didn't want this merit bureaucracy. And so today's Communist Party is trying to overcome that and do some sort of merit-based system. But you always have this merit-based versus loyalty-based, and that will always conflict. Okay, let's go over to political change. There have been a number of changes. First of all, we have the Great Leap Forward. That goes back to the 50s. This is their attempt to modernize. The Great Leap Forward ended up being a great leap backwards. So that was a change. We also have the Cultural Revolution. Cultural Revolution was brought on by the fact that Mao thought that the bureaucracy was getting too rigid, wouldn't change. So he takes the bureaucracy and moves it to the countryside, brings the peasants and the masses in to run the government, and this whole economy goes down. And it's not over until Mao dies. Then we have Deng, and Deng's 4 major modernizations. And you can remember those: AIDS, AIDS, agriculture, industry, defense, and science. And so that's a big political change. But those reforms, along with the economic ones, bring China to modern China. And so always remember, in this area there has always been a tension between political reform and economic reform. It's been hard for China to reform economically without reforming politically, as it was the Soviet Union. Let's go to economic change. Some of the things you can mention for that is the responsibility system. This is where he privatized individual agriculture. They didn't privatize the big collective farms, but they privatized the backyard farms, where you could grow your own crops and do your own thing. We also have economic reform in the special economic zones. These usually were coastal cities where they allowed foreign investment and free trade. Another economic change are your town and village enterprises. These are rural factories and businesses run by local governments, plus some private input. So they were partially privatizing small business. But again, your big industry is still controlled by the government, Chinese Communist Party. Okay, let's go over to globalization. Some of the big issues include the World Trade Organization. China was allowed to join this. And there's been pressures on them to keep copyrights and private property issues. But they were allowed to join. Russia still is not a part of the World Trade Organization. Another issue is Hong Kong. They look at Hong Kong after Hong Kong was given back in 1997. They look at it one country but two systems. So they have one of the most capitalistic systems in Hong Kong. Hong Kong was capitalism at its least controlled. And the question we ask, is this a Trojan horse now in China that will unleash unlimited capitalism? Or will they crack down and end this special relationship that they had? Because they promised with the treaty to keep the system for, I think, 50 years. I'm not correct on the exact number, but they promised to keep it for so many years as a treaty that gave it back. Also, we have them on globalization issues with the Olympics. They wanted to go global, so they made a great showplace of the Olympics of 2008. And did they become part of the global world with the Olympics? Well, remains to see seen. The other big issue, of course, is trade. China is one of the biggest trade partners, and that lends to globalization with treaties and that as far as what kind of trade they're going to have. So that is globalization. So let's go to our last page here. And here we have the public policy issues. Probably the biggest is economics and all the problems associated with economic reform. That includes corruption. It's hard to have a system like they have with the Guanxi and economic prosperity without some reform. We also have the problem of unemployment and inequality. Communism is based on the fact that everybody should be equal. But yet, when you have a free enterprise system, you're going to have people that don't have jobs, that are in an inefficient job, and you're also going to have people who have more money than others. And what does that say about communism? So you got two issues side by side. You've got issues of inflation with the economy that they've got. You've got issues with product safety, and the Chinese have been caught a number of times using lead paint and other things that aren't safe. You've got problems with pollution in their cities with all this industrialization. They've got major pollution, and when we had the Olympics there, we saw firsthand that the smoke was gray, and we've got major problems. So these are all public policy issues that they're dealing with in China. And then coupled with democracy and human rights, also the fact of economic reform versus political reform. So, huge issues here in China. Okay, let's go to the policy-making process. Two things you need to remember. Of course, the people who set the agenda are the Chinese Communist Party. They set the agenda, they run the whole show. They're given the input, they're the ones who make policy, they're the ones who implement policy, they're the ones who evaluate their own policy. But there are two things you need to remember about that policy-making process. And the first is the factionalism that goes on in the making and implementing of the policy. There are four major factions. And the first are the radicals. The radicals were led by Mao and his successors, the Gang of Four, which were led by his wife. You have the conservatives. Now, Jiang Zemin was one of the lead conservatives. And when we cracked down at Tiananmen, he was the head person to crack down. And then we have the moderates. The moderates are led by Deng Xiaoping, and his group. And then we have the reformers. And the reformers are led by Hu and Hua. Now, these people will fight for who gets the policy implementation power. And this whole thing was found at Tiananmen as who had power for what? Who with WHO,
Oh.
not who. So, that is policymaking. We go over to the military. The military is the People's Liberation Army. That is really the third parallel of this hierarchy. In the government, controlling the Army is the Central Military Commission. And its parallel part in the Communist Party is the Military Affairs Committee. So those two, in the party and the government, are the ones who are parallel, controlling each other and making sure the people are doing what the military wants. So the military is subordinated to the party, just as the government is. Okay, let's go to our last one, and that is comparisons. The best comparison is China to the USSR. And if they ask questions to compare it, that's a good one. Also, we have China globalizing and looking how it's globalized compared to other third world countries. Because China has been a third world country itself, and some people still say it is, but where is it in this development of globalization? But China has unique issues, and you compare them in the Freedom Index. The Freedom Index, they are the very bottom. Okay, any questions? All right, we're good for China. And you guys